what's interesting is I heard about it from my friend Laura Rossellini, actually had been invited to join this program. Laura Rossellini is the chair of the economics department at the University of Alabama. And so, and she's a great friend and also has been a co-author on some other projects and is of course, a fellow with the center. And she was talking about it and I said, that sounds amazing, actually. She was mentioning that the goal was to basically have a nice place to sort of foster creativity and ideas in our research. And I said, oh, well, who's doing that? And she said, Mary Rigdon, I actually know Mary from a long time back, and I'm a big fan of her work as well. And so I actually reached out to Mary and said, hey, Mary, I heard you're doing this really interesting, you have this center that'll be hosting visiting scholars, and this is something that sounds wonderful to me, and I'm just over here in Los Angeles, and I love Tucson. Would be happy to be part of what you're doing. And then I felt very fortunate that Mary actually selected me to be part of the program because these are top scholars from around the country, and so I'm happy to be part of the group of visiting scholars for the center. One of my sort of dissertation committee faculty members was a man named Tim Kaysen. And one of the things that he told us in our experimental class was that, if you pick a topic and you stick to that topic, you can, continue to do work and variations and treatments and exploring different ideas. And then you have one kind of main literature. But I have really done exactly the opposite, which is basically try to think of things that interest me, areas of study that we haven't explored yet. Sometimes I can be inspired by something I'm watching on TV. Laura and I actually have a project that was inspired by a conversation at a party, actually after a conference. So basically we wanted to test whether men and women treated each other differently in the negotiation, just all else equal, and then examining this role of information. And what we found was that, surprising, I think, to some of us, that there were no gender differences between men and women in offers men made to women or women made to men or men to men or women to women, holding all else constant. But when we looked at the information, we found that in the treatments where you could provide some information about your outside obligation, we found that men tended to report really high levels of outside obligations, and that women did as well, but not nearly to the same magnitude. Right. So we found that in these negotiations that there were really no differences other than the fact that men, when they were employees, tended to overreport their obligations, and women also overreported, but to a lesser extent and also less frequently. And then we also found something that we wouldn't have predicted, which is that sometimes people would underreport. And we found that women were more likely to underreport, which was also really intriguing because it tells us that there might be some scenarios where women actually thought maybe they would be more likely to be believed if they reported less than the actual obligation that they were facing when the obligation was high. So we were able to basically say that it does seem to be a difference in terms of willingness to share information about outside obligations that come at a financial expense for men than for women. We did find that people who reported having higher outside obligations received higher offers. So we were able to show that men then had higher earnings as a function of reporting these higher obligations, whether they were true or not. Right. We found that based on the offer, that the amounts were the same, right, depending on what was reported. And so it did indicate, at least in our data, that women would be able to use this to their advantage. Yeah. What's interesting is then when we share this at a conference, in some ways the colleague was right in that people who reported higher outside obligations did receive higher earnings, right? There is a greater willingness to share costs when you believe someone else has higher obligations. But immediately there was this question of whether that would backfire for women, in that women in these negotiations would often want to conceal, I don't want to share that I have a husband and 6 kids and other obligations, because that might actually make an employer believe that they would be less able to work, right, and potentially less productive. And so this is now a variation we're talking about for the next experiment. And it is funny to think, well, that, again, the colleague was right in one way, but then the recommendation might be actually quite wrong and that a woman coming in and saying, I have all of these obligations that I must meet might not actually be favorable to their cause. Yeah, so Laura and I are actually meeting tomorrow on Zoom to start talking about this and formulating a project, and then hopefully we'll run some sessions, and then Laura and I are actually going to line up to meet to come out here to work on this project in May. So we've already sort of set aside that time to be together to work on that project and a few others while we're here. Obviously, I was asking if I could be part of it, so I'm already your target audience. But I think that what the center is doing with bringing different scholars here from different institutions, and then also sometimes having an overlap, really is going to help, I think, propel a lot of our research faster and have it also be potentially more interesting as a function of these sort of overlapping questions and sort of parallel topics that can kind of, when they overlap, create really new areas of study that we haven't looked at before. And so I think being able to collaborate with Mary, being able to collaborate with other fellows. In the fall when I was visiting, we had Bart Wilson was here, who's at Chapman, who's in other parallel work, and James Kono, who's also at Loyola Marymount, who does other really interesting work, and trying to see where we have these areas of overlap where we can really look deeper at a lot of these questions using a variety of methods. Again, I was like, Tucson, it's definitely a driving factor. I've really loved being here. Our Economic Science Association conference is actually run by the University of Arizona about every 4 years. They hold it at the Westward Look. So my first experience with Tucson was, I think, 2005. I was here as a brand new faculty member in Tucson at the Westward Look and thinking, this is gorgeous, and I love this place, and I love that the University of Arizona is sort of one of the founding places of experimental economics, right? You have the Economic Science Institute here, as well as that overlaps with colleagues that I had at Purdue, where we have the Vernon Smith Experimental Laboratory. And of course, we have the lab at LMU, and a lot of sort of overlapping areas of interest, both academically and then also geographically. I mean, Tucson is gorgeous. It's a beautiful oasis, and that's coming from someone who lives in Los Angeles. So, even I really get excited to come out here and be in the mountains and out kind of in the desert. And it's just so beautiful and grand. And it's a really nice time to just be away sort of from the hustle and bustle of home and LA, and really just focus on my writing and my work, meeting with colleagues, making new partnerships, new collaborations, new co-authors, and also attending talks while I'm here too. It's been great. So my second visit out here, I was able to give a guest lecture in Mary Rigdon's PPEL, the senior level course, where they look at kind of sort of the bigger questions as they're leaving the program. And I was able to guest lecture in her class, and it was really, really wonderful. They have such a nice mix when you're thinking about, political science and economics, philosophy and law. And they were each able to bring different questions from sort of their areas of study. I thought it was a really wonderful opportunity to meet with students from a different institution and kind of talk about the work that I'm doing and have them hear about that. And then I was also able to relate it to the works that Mary was doing. And so it's a nice moment in time, I think, for them to realize what an amazing professor they have and how wonderful she is and how well respected she is. And so I think it was a really nice time to be able to be in the classroom and be here and talk about my research and talk about their professor and have it all seem very high level and very exciting and kind of cutting edge in economics.